As we come to the end of the 24-25 season, it's fair to say it hasn't been great. Yes, we're in a European final in just over a week, but our bread and butter, the Premier League, our form has been shocking. We've won 10, drawn 9, and lost 17 games so far this season. A goal difference of minus 11 sees us currently sitting in 16th, and there's a good chance we could finish as low as 17th. It's officially our worst ever season in the Premier League era, and arguably our worst ever in top flight football. It's been clear for months that we've prioritised our European campaign over the Premier League, but there's been no excuses for the level of performances we've seen. I think a lot has been made of Amram's tactics and his system since he came in. A lot of people are saying this 3-4-3 and it hasn't worked and he needs to change to suit the players, but personally I don't think that's the way forward, and I'm glad he hasn't changed. Ten Hag, when he came in his first season, obviously he had a certain style of play and a certain system he tried to implement, and it didn't work. So he changed to suit the players that he had. And look, arguably you could say it kind of worked for the first season. You know, we got us to a cup final. We won the Carabao Cup. But you're almost bending to the players, and you're almost allowing that player power to creep in. If you change everything that got you where you are, that got you that job at United, you're throwing all that out the window to suit the players that are there. And an Amarim system isn't a rigid 3-4-3. It's a lot more fluid than that. You can see it in games. It adapts within the games, and he even adapts it, depending on the opponent that we're facing at the time. And I kind of alluded to it there. Like, Amarim was brought in because of how his teams play, his system, his tactics. And if he changes that, he just, you throw all that out the window just to suit the players that we have. But I think what his system has done, it has shown which players simply aren't good enough for United. It's highlighted who's not good enough, or who's not fit enough for the pace of the Premier League. I think a lot of the players that we have are more suited to European football, which is possibly why we've been, we've had such a good season in Europe. Still the only unbeaten side across all European competitions. Arguably because it's less intense, it's less physical. Players have more time in the ball, so they have almost more time to think about what they're doing. But look, we've seen in the league, we get overrun by every other team. These teams are more physical than us, they're more athletic. And it has very little to do with the footballing ability of the players. You can argue on paper, we have a better team. Okay, maybe not team, maybe team is the wrong word. We have a better group of players than most teams in the league, but we're not as a good a team as a lot of the others. So where do United go from here, and how do we solve all these problems? Look, I think firstly, Amram needs financial backing in the summer to allow him to get the players he wants. It's no secret we need a striker. Highland hasn't been good enough. There's still a player in there. He's shown moments, and I mean brief moments, of what he can do, but just not consistently enough. We're linked with Liam Delap from Ipswich. but he's another young player. I think we need to be bringing in an established striker who will guarantee you 20 goals minimum a season. There's some big names out there that we've been linked with. Whether they're the answer, who knows? Any player you bring in is a gamble. We've seen it in the past. We bring in players based on their ability, based on the name that they have, and it hasn't worked for whatever reason. Whether it's the pressure of playing for Manchester United, or they have the wrong attitude. But it's the one thing that we need to get right this summer is getting in the players that Ruben Amorim wants for his system. We also need to sell the players that he has deemed aren't good enough. And look, you could go through that squad and you could probably count on one hand the players that you would keep. So there's the squad needs a massive overhaul, and it's not going to be possible to do it all in the one window. So it's going to take time, but we need to be smart and move on to players that have no future at United. Look, you could argue there's players there that have potential, that they can get better. They're still young, but we've seen in the past players that we've moved on that the fans considered had potential to be decent players, but the club obviously didn't see it the same way. Moved on. Players like Anthony Elanga is probably the most obvious recent one. He's killing it at Nottingham Forest at the moment, but look, there's a lot less pressure at a club like Nottingham Forest compared to Manchester United, the biggest club in the world. So obviously in hindsight, it's very easy to look at certain players that have left and go like, oh well, they're performing at a different club, but there's also different levels, different pressures at these clubs. But yeah, look, we just need to be smart with these deals. And we also need to look at the players that we can get the best deals on, players that are going to bring in the most money. But we don't want to be selling the players just because we can get the most money for them. They also need to be deemed surplus to requirement. I don't want to be selling Kobbie Mainoo because we can get 70 million for him. Kobbie Mainoo is an outstanding player as it is, and he can only improve. And I definitely think he has a massive future at United, so long as he wants to be here. But yeah, look, I think it's selling the players that we want to get rid of. The likes of Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Anthony, who are already out on loan. Arguably, they've already been deemed surplus to requirements by Amorim because they're already out on loan. So it's those kind of deals and getting the best that we can for them. But yeah, look, I mean, what we saw in the last few league games as well, we've clearly prioritized Europe. You can see there was a lack of urgency and desire from the players. Amorim said himself that the entire culture at the club needs to change, and for me, I think that starts with the owners. 100% of the mess the club is in is down to the Glazer ownership over the past 20 years as of yesterday. I think Sir Alex Ferguson was able to kind of hold things together a bit, given the kind of the authority he had at the club. He was able to keep a lot of that nonsense at bay. But once he left and David Gill left, I think everything went downhill. We saw the likes of Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold coming in, who should never have been given the positions they were given at the club. And we saw some crazy signings coming in. and just some crazy stuff happening, like, you know, signing Pogba for 90 million after leaving him go for nothing. You know, Alexis Sanchez, Di Maria. Obviously, look, in hindsight, they didn't work out, but yeah, there's just some crazy stuff happening at the club. As I said, Ed Woodward, Richard Arnold, these people who are not football people, they're business people, and that was the mistake that happened. Was the Glazers treated it as a business, you know, taking dividends out of the club, not putting a single penny of investment into the stadium, the facilities, the training grounds, you know, and it's ended up leaving United decades behind nearly every other team in the Premier League. You know, I think nothing will truly change until the Glazers have completely gone. And I know Sir Jim Ratcliffe has a 29% stake in the club, and at the moment is in full charge of all football aspects of the club. But you know, they still call a lot of the shots at board level, and they just need to go. And you would think that Ratcliffe's plan coming in, investing in the club, with his minority stake, you know, you'd like to think that his plan is to complete a full takeover at some point. Look, hopefully that happens soon, because as I said, I don't think much is in the way of culture, much is going to change until the Glazers have completely gone from the club. In terms of the culture in the dressing room, I think the players need to be held more accountable. You know, we've seen it over previous years. If things aren't going well under a manager, they just kind of tend to almost sack it in and just give up. You know, give up trying. You know, it's not just this season we've seen it; it's under previous managers. But I think this season is obviously taken to a whole other level. It's been absolutely shocking. You know, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the lack of effort on the pitch at times has been beyond the joke. Regardless of whether whether or not we can finish in the top four in the league, whether we're even competing for the league, you know, to quote Gary Neville, this is Manchester United. You know, it's the biggest and best club in the world, and there needs to be a level of pride in the players when they step out onto the football pitch, to be willing to give a 100% for 90 minutes of every game. And we haven't seen that. You know, I think one of the biggest things that's lacking in the dressing room is leaders. We haven't seen enough leaders. Yes, there is leaders in there. Bruno is a leader. Maguire, to a lesser extent, is a leader. He's a senior player. You know, De Ligt has shown he's a leader. Martinez, another leader. But you arguably need a spine of leaders, from your goalkeeper to your defenders, your central midfielders, up to your striker. You need leaders right across the pitch, and we've been lacking that for many, many years. And that's another thing that needs to change. You know, we've literally seen players not trying to chase back after losing possession of the ball, not willing to fight for every ball. You know, and it needs to change. Like Amram said, he's been in talks with Ineos on a daily basis and knows exactly what's needed to turn things around at the club. I think if he gets the backing in the summer, I believe he can get us back to the top, fighting for trophies, both domestically and in Europe. And look, I don't think Ineos are even considering changing the manager, given he's only been here for a few months. I know there's been a lot of talk over the last few weeks, you know, amongst the online fan base mostly, that, you know, Amram needs to go. He's had his time, but, you know, when you consider he came in midway through an already abysmal season. You know, he came in November. You know, I think we were already 13th in the league and already playing poor football. You know, it's already been well documented. He wanted to wait until this summer to come in. So he'd have his, you know, his full time, obviously at Sporting. He get to complete out the season there, but also he would have the full pre-season with the squad and assess him. But you know, he was told, nope, it's now or never. So ultimately, he had to say yes if he wanted the United job, which he did. So he had to come in halfway through a season. You know, he inherited a squad that was built for a completely different manager with a different style. You know, only Patrick Dorgo was bought for Amorim in January. Yes, we also signed Aidan Heaven, but you know, he's still only a kid and, you know, was bought for the future, whereas Dorgo has been straight into the thrown straight into the first team. And look, at times he's looked a little off the pace, you know, but he's still young, and will get better with time. But yeah, look, I mean, in terms as well as, like, you know, you look at the Europa League now that, you know, we know where we're going to finish in the league. Our priority has to be winning the Europa League this season. Not just in terms of winning the trophy, because that's not going to save our season or it's not going to make it a successful season, but what it will do is obviously get us into the Champions League next season. It will give us extra funds that are going to be vital if we want to bring in the players that we need. So, you know, it is vital that we beat Spurs in that final in just over a week's time, and, you know, ensure we get Champions League next football. I know Amorim has already said that if a player is only willing to come to United if they have Champions League football, then we don't want them. And I like that and I agree with it, but at the same time, you know, it is going to play a factor in whether we sign certain players or not. You know, it will. You know, but obviously the financial aspect, you know, is going to play a big role in that as well, of who we can sign. But on the flip side, you know, there's an argument to be made that if we don't win the Europa League, you know, we don't have European football next season, we'll still be able to sign players. You know, it's United. You know, United still has that pull whether we're in Europe or not. But what it will do is it will allow Amorim more time in between games next season. You know, when you're not playing Thursday, Sunday, you're playing Saturday. You know, you're playing one game a week, whether it be the league or the cup. So he will have more time with the players to nail down his system and his style and what he wants the players to do. So, but look, obviously, you know, the size of United need to be playing in Europe, regardless of how rubbish we're going to be in the competition next season. We need to be in Europe. You know, you want to be competing for the biggest trophies. Not saying we're going to compete, but you want to be in those competitions. You know, United need to be in Europe. But look, yeah, going back to Ruben Amorim and his system, I fully believe that if Amorim gets the players he wants this summer, regardless of Europe. And he moves on a lot of the players that he wants to move on that aren't good enough, and he has a full pre-season with his team. I fully believe we'll be pushing for top 6 next season. I know many people will think I'm completely delusional, but I don't care. I fully believe it'll happen. I think there's the one argument that he had as well, like, you're coming in midway through a season trying to change a system, and you're playing a game every 2-3 days. There's nowhere near enough time on a training pitch to instill in the players what you want them to do. For the first 2-3 months of the season, they're playing Ten Hag's system, and now all of a sudden you want them to play your system. It's not going to change overnight. But like, Amram was brought in for a reason. He was brought in to rebuild United, and get them back at playing attacking, attractive football. And look, have we seen that this season? On the whole, no. But we have seen moments in games of what is possible if he gets time. He's, as I said, he inherited a poor team midway through a poor season. Trying to change how we play, the structure, and also the mentality. It's a lot to do in a little time in between games. Yes, the argument is there that these are professional footballers and they should be able to adapt to a different style of play. But I think if anything, the new system has shown the many weaknesses we have in our squad, and it will take time to get it right. And it starts with the recruitment this summer. It's vital we get all, if most, if not all, of the signings right this summer, and for the next few transfer windows as well. This isn't all going to be fixed this summer. Yes, this is arguably our most important summer transfer window in decades, but it's not all going to be fixed in this transfer window. It's still going to take time. It's still going to take another 2 or if not 3 transfer windows for Amram to get the squad he wants. But with Ineos in charge of the deals, I fully believe we'll be back competing for trophies, and consistently very soon. Look, they showed last summer the signings that they made coming in. De Ligt, Mazraoui, Yaro, Xerxes, to an extent. He had a tough start, but they've arguably been our best players this season in what has been an awful season. But the players that Ineos brought in last summer have been our best players, some of our best players outside of Bruno this season. So yeah, look, I have faith we'll get the right players in, and given time, I think Amram can get us back. But look, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know who do you want us to sign? Who do you think we can bring in? Do you think Amram will get the time that he needs? Yeah, let us know. Get the discussion going in the comments. Smash the like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll catch you later.